So we've been looking at the ballade as an example of the form-fixed poems. Middle English poetry is essentially a French-inspired poetry. Well, I don't want to say it's essentially because we're also going to look at popular forms, but there is a clear French inflection here when poets take on the form-fixed. And remember, we spoke previously about how England is a cross-channel kingdom. The most famous ballad or ballade, we pronounce it ballade to not confuse it with the Victorian ballad, is a sequence. It's sort of a debate poem, and it's called Fortune. Now, Fortune is a editorial title. None of the manuscripts actually include the word fortune. The titles are actually in the rubrics of the poem, and they're in French. But in the manuscripts, all you get is this ballade de visage sans peinture, a ballad about a face without makeup. It's about seeing Fortune for who she is without her makeup, without her false presentation. So here we have a debate between a person called the plaintiff, that's a legal term, bringing suit or a lawsuit to Fortune. He is suing the same Fortune that we already looked at in the Machaut ballade. The tone is angry. The rubric here tells us who is speaking and tells us the beginnings of each of the ballades. Le plaintif contre fortune, the plaintiff, the party making the suit against fortune. This wretched world, this transmutation, transmutation, random cyclical variations of events. The world's just constantly changing. As weal, happiness or woe, now pauvre, poor, and now honor, right? So this is the wheel going up and down. Without an ordre vis discretion, governed is by fortuna's error. Fortune's governance of man's affairs, and remember that she's famous for her wheel, is described as an error of thought. The plaintiff, aided by reason, now here it's not an allegory because he says my reason. Because of reason, he can see the error. And we know the rubric from above tells us the purpose of the poem, right? He will reveal Fortune's true face or visage without makeup or peinture, right? Painting of her face. We will see her for what she is, a monster. The tone is not only angry, it's disrespectful. Here in the refrain, for finally Fortune I defy. How do we know it's disrespectful? Because Fortune is a goddess. How is he addressing her? It's the pronoun, it's the. If you remember your Middle English grammar, the is originally the singular for you, and you was the plural. But what happens is, following the patterns of French pronouns, tu and vous, tu being the informal, and vous being both the plural and the formal singular, comparable in Spanish to tu and usted, but in Spanish you have ustedes to make clear that usted and ustedes are formal. In French, vous is either singular formal or singular plural. Here, his use of thee, thy, and thine are disrespectful. What pronoun should he be using when addressing a goddess? Usted in Spanish, vous in French, and in this French milieu of English poetry, you should be the proper term. That's why we have you all, y'all, all of y'all. Those are making you clear that you is now plural. That thee is combative. The ballade devolves into a struggle between a plaintiff clearly angry that he has lost everything. And that's also in the French line. J'ai tout perdu mon temps et mon labour. I've lost or wasted all my time and all my labor or effort. He's clearly hit a roadblock. The wheel has gone down. The ballade devolves into a struggle between a plaintiff clearly angry that he has lost everything, and a haughty goddess, the allegorical figure of Fortune, defending her powers as ultimately beneficial. Now, she argues from a philosophical position taken straight out of Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, where Fortune's malevolence, all of the bad things that you suffer from getting in Fortune's wake, can be understood as good because having that sort of knowledge of malevolence is useful. Through the downward turn of the wheel, she argues, you gain some philosophical clarity over the way you wish to interpret adversity. It's all in her response. Notice the rubric for the second ballade states that this is la réponse de fortune au plaintif, the Fortune's response to the plaintiff. And her first statement is philosophical. No man is wretched but himself it ween. No man is truly wretched or in a bad situation unless he believes it, right? Unless he believes it. It's a belief that you are wretched. And he that hath himself hath suffisance. But if you are self-sufficient, then things that are bad that happen to you will not affect you. This is the position of philosophy in Boethius. Then she tells him he's being ungrateful. Why sayest thou then, I am to thee so keen, so cruel, that hast thyself out of my gouvernance, that I've basically kicked you out of my rule? Say thus instead, grand merci, thank you of thine abundance, of your generosity, your abundance, your bounty, that thou hast lent, or this. Why wilt thou strive? Why are you arguing with me? Just be happy with what I've given you, what I've lent. Not given, because the good times always follow the bad times and vice versa. Notice how she's treating him. What are the pronouns? Thee, thy, thou. It's very revealing. But remember, if you know your Spanish and your French, to, in both those languages, can also reflect a position of authority. She is his superior. She's a goddess. Then she speaks on his behalf. In this case, in an affectionate, just like the Spanish too can be affectionate. When she says, why don't you say, grand merci of thine abundance, like among friends, hey, Fortune, thanks for all the things you've given me, the things that you, thou, in that affectionate way, have lent me. We see this as well in the first ballade, when he addresses the great philosopher Socrates with that affectionate thou. O Socrates, thou steadfast champion, she never might be thy tormentor. She could never hurt you. He's saying this in affection as if Socrates is a friend, because his philosophical system would never accept the idea of Fortune. Then she moves to annoyance. Wilt thou then make a statute on thy queen? A statute's like a law applying to the queen. In other words, will you rule the queen, that I shall bin at thine ordinance, that I should be at your command? Those thous and these, she's treating him like a child. She's telling him all the lessons he's learned from her. I have thee talked division between friend of effect and friend of contenance. I've taught you the difference between who is a friend indeed, like actually acts like a friend, and a friend in outward appearance of contenance. Third ballade of this sequence is cut up into two parts. You can tell because they're sharing the same rhyme scheme. The plaintiff's response is bad. Thy lore, thy teachings, I damn. This is a pure rejection of her teachings. Now her response is utter ignorance. Thou pinchest at my mutabilité. You're finding fault in change, the way I'm all about change. For I be lent a drop of my riches, and now me liketh to withdraw me?
Notice how the refrain's meaning changes. This rule will not fail, is what she's saying, right? And it first relates to the terrible nature of fortune. And in her response, the refrain reasserts the solidity of her rule. And then a threat. You'll get yours. And that rule will not fail. Do you understand? And then the poem ends with an envoy. And we talked about how the envoy, short little stanzas that send the poem out into the world, they turn it into a message. Envoyer in French means to send something out. They're always addressed to the prince. And the reason why is because so every chant royale rap battle ends with an appeal to the prince. But notice how cordial she is to the prince in asking him, this is Fortune's envoy, asking him to deal with this complainer. Okay, the prince is being set up as a judge in this dispute.
Princess, I pray you of your gentilesse, let not this man on me thus cry and plain, like keep on complaining, please. Have him stop, and I shall quit you your business. I will relinquish to you all legal rights and duties. At my request, as three of you are twain, and but you list relieve him of his pain, if you would just relieve him of his pain, prayeth his best friend of his noblesse, that to some better estate he may attain. And then it ends in Latin, explicit.
How do you interpret this, you, your? You could look at it as the plural, because we notice that prince is spelled with an S. I argue that that prince with an S is a conventional writing of the prince. The prince is always written with an S because that comes from French poetry as well. I read this as a polite, respectful change of pronouns. In other words, she's not addressing a group of princes because that's not the way the envoys work. She's addressing the prince. And she's literally asking him to decide. But she's using that you because he is either above her and she is using a sign of respect to him. She admits it might be better if he's in a better place or state, since it is clear that the only reason he's complaining is because he's in a bad situation. He seems to have lost everything, as that French line says. So his complaining to Fortune has gotten really annoying. It's where Fortune is reinterpreting her own gifts as the purveyances of God.
Lo, that's an interjection. The execution of the majesté, he's talking about God, his majesty, that all purveyeth of his righteousness, right? Who just gives everything, furnishes from righteousness. That same thing, fortune, clepenier, you guys call what God gives fortune. You blind beasts full of lewdness, you ignorant animal.
It's only the uneducated, the lewd, who call these gifts good or bad, the products of fortune. The quote reaffirms what Boethius's philosophy claims, that fortune really doesn't exist. It's only in the mind of the stupid, the lewd, the irrational. Think of my show's Lover. Only people who are not clear about the conditions of life would complain that something outside of their control is bringing them down. The personification, the allegorical figure of fortune is acting as a replacement for the failures of the person. But can princess with an S be understood in the plural? Does the plural mark her understanding, say, of the Trinity, the three persons of God? In that case, she's asking for a religious intervention by either God the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit to basically just shut them up. In our next video, we'll look at the other most famous form fix, the rondo.
Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.